It's been quite a few years since we last got a brand new Ace Attorney game. That was back around 2016 for the Nintendo 3DS. While the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles isn't the long-awaited new entry in the series, it is the long-awaited port of two incredibly unique games that never made it out to the West. The Great Ace Attorney Chronicles in that sense is still a great entry for the series, one that uniquely chooses to focus on the history and the accuracy of those eras as opposed to the humorous elements that were so well regarded with the series. But before we jump into the review, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on my reviews. According to YouTube, only 10% of you watching are subscribed, so make sure you get subscribed. Being a collection of two titles that follow up straight into each other, I'll be covering this collection as a whole unit rather than two separate games, and that's more imperative with its story. You play as Ryunosuke Naruhodo, the ancestor to the great Phoenix Wright, living during the Meiji period around the late 1860s. Around this time was also the British Victorian era, a vital time period for both countries, and this game serves as a commentary for those time periods rather than a build-up of funny and overly dramatic court cases. Our protagonist is quickly thrown into the center stage as our first court case is defending ourselves in a trial, elaborating on some of the older mechanics of the series while also serving as this game's tutorial introduction. At this point, Ryunosuke is still a rookie. It's clear he has talent, but hasn't really honed his skills yet and still awkwardly yells objection and yes during trials. His statements aren't said so confidently, usually sounding more like questions rather than statements. However, as both time and trials go by, there's a progression to his demeanor as a lawyer and an investigator. That's partially fast-forwarded by a tragic event that leads him to going to England, where the juxtaposition with the Japanese justice system throws a wrench into his practice. While the story is once again less humorous than other entries in the series, its attention to detail when it comes to trials and specific laws during this time period is shockingly in-depth. I didn't go into this collection for a history lesson, but I greatly appreciated it. The one major piece of feedback I'd have for these games, especially with this writing, is that they definitely feel like two halves of a whole, something that isn't bad now having both of these games in a single collection. However, upon finishing the first game, there were trials that straight up just didn't have any conclusion, and I didn't get answers until the second game. I can imagine that not going over too well when these were originally released in Japan as two separate games years apart. For those unfamiliar with the Ace Attorney series, it plays primarily as a visual novel with some interactive elements in the investigation moments. You might be familiar with the setup if you played something like Danganronpa before. Here you listen to the witness testimony and cross-examine the evidence and reports respectively. Here's where you can press witnesses so they can elaborate on their stories, perhaps adding new details to their story, or contradicting something they previously said during the case. From there, you can look over your court record for evidence, perhaps realizing certain elements of the evidence that you can use to contradict the witness statement. It's a nice gameplay loop that dives into the detective and investigation elements of the series quite well. However, it wouldn't be an Ace Attorney game if it didn't add some sort of new element, and this collection is no exception. Once Ryunosuke is in England, he has to work with the English justice system, and naturally, it changes the way we conduct trials. England has a jury system, so as opposed to Japan, we no longer just have to convince the judge, but now we also have to convince the jury as well. Even then, it still doesn't exactly follow the traditional modern jury system view you might have if you live in the United States. Here the jury can decide at any point if the defendant is guilty, and it's up to you to win back the jury by using their own statements against each other so that it's no longer a unanimous decision and the trial can continue. I thought this element was great, at least at the start. However, over the course of the story, it became a bit too predictable and repetitive that it did start to feel more like a chore as opposed to a fun new feature. What was humorously well done was the addition of Sherlock Holmes deductions. Of course, the Ace Attorney series is a fan of Sherlock Holmes, so it's only natural they'd add some sort of element of him into the series, without getting copyright infringement sued of course. It's here where the great not Sherlock Holmes goes on the tirade of solving a case in a single go, only not exactly. Every one of his deductions has something wrong with it, and it's up to us to analyze the evidence and statements to correct the original deduction. It's an incredibly well done addition to the series that feels like a fireworks show, the way it just appears out of nowhere and is so well presented in terms of animation work. Juxtaposed with what is mostly a visual novel style type game, it truly shines as one of the more iconic additions to the series. Ultimately, the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles is a bundle that takes more of a historic approach to its gameplay, focusing on the courtroom and history between Japan and Britain, rather than one that throws comically dramatic characters at you for humor. It truly does feel like I'm playing a history book, but in the best way possible. I wish the balance between the games was a bit better, as the first half feels more like a partial game, but as a bundle, it feels like a great way to experience this as a whole rather than separated. Originally released on the Nintendo 3DS, I was excited to experience the visual upgrade for this re-release localized bundle. This new bundle is available on Nintendo Switch, PS4, and PC, and I mostly played on the Nintendo Switch with a bit of PS4, but despite being the weakest of the three platforms, the difference was negligible for the Switch. Aside from looking ever so slightly sharper on the edges of characters, Nintendo Switch looks just as great as the PS4 and PC counterparts. As for the upgrades from the 3DS, the resolution has greatly been increased with an increased resolution specifically with the texture elements on characters. It looks fantastic in person, especially when playing in handheld mode where the pixel density is higher. The animation work here, whether in a court case or just in the middle of a deduction, is phenomenally well done with plenty of life and personality added to these characters. The designs of characters do tend to lean into the characterization of these two nations during this time period. For example, the Japanese cast is quite reserved and polite, while the English cast shows a more extroverted approach to court cases. It's racist for sure, but also very accurate to the history of these two countries during the Meiji period, and the depictions they had of each other, where Japan was adopting a lot of elements of Britain's monarchy, while Britain never really saw Japan as an equal. While there's hardly any voice dialogue throughout this bundle, there is plenty of music and sound design choices that help elevate the bundle's presentation. There's a variety of songs that appropriately convey the atmosphere and tension of each of the court trials. For example, you might hear an elegant sounding song when interviewing the high-class English exchange student, although when you get yelled at by the judge, the music will either cut out completely or turn into a faster-paced heavy string song that exudes this pressure in the courtroom. All of these moments are combined with some well-timed rumbles on the Switch especially that helped immerse me into every trial that preceded. The Great Ace Attorney Chronicles is a fantastic collection that faithfully localizes two Great Ace Attorney spin-off games for the West. While they do change up the formula of the mainline games for a more historically accurate approach to the series, I didn't mind it at all and in fact welcomed the refreshing take on the long-established series. Capcom could have easily phoned in a port just by translating the games and throwing the ROMs onto a disc and calling it a day. But the addition of bonus feature commentary and collectible assets outside of the game made this feel more like a tribute and celebration of the series rather than just a quick cash grab. Thank you very much for watching my review. If you found it informative and entertaining, then please consider subscribing. I make reviews for all the latest AAA and indie games. If you could have an Ace Attorney game take place during any time period and place, where would it be and why? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, until the next video, I'll talk to you in the comments down below or over on the free Discord server in the description.